Hi there, I'm Kevin McManus with Great Systems. I'd like to thank you for visiting the Great Systems website, and in particular, taking the time to watch this video where I'm going to compare 4 different root cause analysis approaches. Now, I'm going to do this rather quickly, but I'm going to try to do it in a way that helps you get a feel for how these different approaches compare, both on the plus side and on the downside. And as you can see from the slide here, we're going to look at the fault tree diagram, the Fishbone diagram, the 5-why process, and then the TapRooT root cause analysis process. And I've used all of these over the years. Now, the first thing I'd like to have you think about before we get too deep into this is, how do you find root causes? What questions do you ask when you have a problem, when something goes wrong? In this example, we filled a hanger full of bubbles. I mean, how can that happen? You know, if the first thing you say is, who did this? I want names. It's probably not the best approach to use. And so many of these approaches are based off of Dr. Deming's work and then the Toyota production system, where we're looking for the systemic reasons people make mistakes, not people to blame. So any of these tools will help you get there. Some are just more structured to get you there quicker and more efficiently than others are. As it says on the slide, if you don't know how to ask the right questions, you're not going to really learn anything. So imagine your reaction if someone comes to you and says, here's an error that someone made in one of our retail bakeries. Customer comes in, they want to pick up their going away cake. They open up the lid to make sure the cake looks right, and here's what they saw. Obviously, the customer was not happy. But what's the corrective action going to be? We're surely going to take care of the customer in the near term, get them another cake, maybe even give it to them for free. But what are we going to do to keep errors like this from happening in the future? How are we going to minimize the opportunities we have for putting the wrong message on the cake? That's the root causes. Now, I've been doing root cause analysis ever since I got out of university, way back in the early 1980s. And back then, the Toyota production system was doing very well in Japan, and we were somewhat resting on our laurels here in the States. And so all of a sudden, the Japanese auto industry started to catch up to the American big three. And we were starting to wonder why. And this NBC white paper comes out, and it's called If Japan Can, Why Can't We? And that kicked off the whole total quality movement, because what we learned is that the Japanese were using the Toyota production system. And so the very first book I learned from was this Quality Circle Leader Manual. And if you thumb back through the manual way back in here, you'll find places where you can see they're talking about fishbone diagrams. Vintage, eh? But this works really very well. But you still have to ask the right questions. You just can't throw whys out there. And on top of that, once you come up with some possible root causes, you've got to test them. You've got to put countermeasures in place. And so what I learned over the years working with problem-solving teams using this type of approach is that there's a first pass yield rate on your root causes. And our goal is to drive that number up over time. Well, we came up with 10 root causes, but only 5 of them were validated when we went out and tested them in the field with the countermeasures we put in place. Now, maybe the countermeasures were bad, but as you can see, a little bit of rework, not that agile of a process. So maybe we could do something differently, but that's how it goes. So if you use the fishbone diagram, that's the approach you need to use. Now, the challenge is doing a good fishbone diagram, because like any tool, you can use it very quickly in a very sketchy manner and get very weak results. One of the challenges with the fishbone diagram is the size of the space you have to work in does limit the level of analysis, because technically you're supposed to go out 5 whys on each of the bones. And so what I learned is called cause-effect diagram with the addition of cards, where we put a big cause-effect diagram on the wall in the workplace, visual management. There's cards there by it. And as any staff member walks by, they can look at the problem. They can look at what's been put up there so far. They can think about it themselves, and if they want to add something, they can grab a card, it's like a Post-it, put their information on there, put it up there. And it helps engage the whole team in trying to solve the problem. Plus, we can see progress over time as we get more and more cards on our cause-effect diagram. But most folks don't go about it that way. They just do a very weak 5 whys. Okay, let's do 5 whys on each of the bones. See what we come up with. And then once you populate or build out your skeleton of your fishbone diagram, you've still got to select root causes to test with countermeasures. And so you might use multi-voting, you might use the Delphi technique. There's multiple approaches. The challenge is, when do you stop? When do you know if you're going deep enough? Can you catch yourself blaming people or blaming equipment, which probably won't lead to the best fixes? Bottom line is, it's an opinion-based tool. I didn't see it as such back in the day, but now I do. 5 whys, opinion-based tool. Now, there are people that can ask very good why questions in succession and get to a systemic root cause. There's also people out there that can ask 5 whys in succession and get to the root cause thereafter, whether it's the true root cause or not. So you can see the pros and cons here. To me, it's too highly dependent on the facilitator's skills, and I have yet to see an organization that can get well-deployed skill sets of the level necessary to make 5 whys work. You're still going to have a certain percentage of root causes that you fail to validate with countermeasures, and so there's going to be some waste, some rework in that root cause selection process. Now, another thing that kind of happens, and where I was with it, is I had started using Fishbones back in the day, and I ran into space constraints, and I started being taught to be a little bit more proactive, and Lean comes along, and we start certifying black belts and master black belts and all that fun stuff. But again, fairly weak training relative to root cause analysis. Get you started, make you dangerous, but it doesn't give you the experience to make you a good investigator or a good problem solver. And I'd actually gravitated more towards failure mode effect analysis. Because with this approach, I'm actually putting my value stream on the wall, or I'm putting the process steps within a given process of the value stream on the wall, and I'm looking for common problems that I have with each process or with each process step or both. And working with my staff, I can prioritize those over time. I can collect data to help validate what the team comes up with from a priority perspective. We can look at conditions that tend to maybe heighten the potential for error with certain process steps or certain processes within the value stream. The point is, we know where our potential problems are, and then we can start employing strategies. When we're being reactive, who knows what path we might go? Now, I combined failure mode and fault free and 5 whys to proactively look at all my process steps. What are the different things that can go wrong with each process step? And then take that out multiple levels. And it tends to gravitate towards work system design gaps or more generic gaps than systemic gaps. But you've had a chance to read this one that's on the screen, and you can tell by looking at it that, okay, the fix would be hire more people, shut down for lunch and breaks. And in my real life work world, that you don't get that luxury very often. Well, here's another one. Person falls while carrying shims to a stairwell and they cut their lip. Shims are these thin strips of metal that we use to level things out. Well, how does he cut his lip? Well, the shim struck his lip as he was trying to break the fall with his hands, a reflexive action. Well, how come he fell forward? Well, he caught his toe on a concrete footing. Well, why did he catch his toe on the footing? The snow had covered it up. He couldn't tell it was there. Well, why was the footing covered with snow? And I think you can see this could take you down a rabbit trail. What concerns me the most is, even if you learn to ask good questions, Will it encourage you to look at the multiple problems within the path to failure that leads to the big issue? And to me, that's the challenge. 5 whys and Fishbone and even fault trees can lead you towards more singular fixes, which reduces risk to some degree, but not to the same level as a complement of well thought out, aligned, and integrated fixes would. Fault trees are closer because they are aligned with the work process and the value stream. We engage the workforce in talking about what are different things that can go wrong, what are things that cause us challenges with each of these steps. We can teach people about different work environment factors, different product and service factors, different customer factors that possibly heighten the cause for errors. And so if I have to do this on the cheap, and for much of my work career, I didn't have a giant training budget. And so I was lucky to be able to go out and get myself formally trained, let alone my folks. And so I would have to train myself, self-study, practice, and then teach it to my folks, and we all would practice. But it works out over time if you're using real data, because you're trying to fix real problems. Bottom line, even when I teach a TapRooT course, what I'm after is, can I teach you better questions to ask to understand human error? That's still one of our greatest weaknesses, especially in Western culture. We don't understand the different factors that cause humans to make seemingly silly mistakes. Like in the example we have here, where there's 3 prices on the price tag. It's obvious someone should have covered up one with the other when they put the second one on. For some reason, they did not. Now, we could simply blame the person, coach the person, and move on with life. But then what happens when we hire the next staff member after that? What happens if this staff member gets busy or gets tired or, and they forget? How can we improve the system so that this type of thing doesn't happen? And as you know, in real life, we're moving more and more away from stickers and just counting on the codes and the ability to update the codes linked to price in the system. The bottom line here is, if your root causes are weak, your corrective actions are most likely going to be weak. Every once in a while, someone has a great fix in mind already, and we just needed the problem-solving process to give them a vehicle to share that. And if that's the case, it's kind of like shame on the supervisor, shame on the team lead, because we should never have ideas just sitting out there waiting to be shared, and the only reason they're not being shared is because we haven't asked. But the whole point here is, if your root causes are weak, your corrective actions will be weak. You don't reduce risk that much. You don't reduce the potential for error that much. And there's a high likelihood that your problems are going to come back. And so I do have information on my Great System site where I talk about how you can actually measure the effectiveness of your root cause analysis process. Because even in Japan, there are criticisms for 5Y. And this gets to that path to failure concept I mentioned earlier. If we look at actual problems in organizations, there may be errors made within the value stream, but there's also opportunities to stop and fix that error that go unaddressed. And it could be in a data review step, it could be in an inspection step, it could be in a second or third or fourth level of assembly, where you're also supposed to look at what has already been done as you do your stage of the assembly process. But this is, when I reflect back on my reactive problem-solving career, I think that was probably the biggest constraint that kept us from being better, is when we did problem-solving, we tend to focus on just a given process step or a given process area. We did not look at that chain of errors that lead to the ultimate failures that we see. So give this some thought as you're evaluating your different root cause processes. These are some of the different factors you can consider as you're evaluating the root cause analysis process. Here's some additional thoughts that I've came up with over time, and a lot of these are just questions. I'd like you to sit there and think about it, and if they don't make sense to you, if you can't come up with answers when you think about them, just drop me a line and I'll share my thoughts with you. But I've had the chance to do almost 40 years of root cause analysis now, and I've learned some things. One thing I've learned is there's a whole lot of waste in our root cause analysis efforts. We spend a lot of time to sometimes get very limited results. So the first thing we need to do is look at what are we investing? What are we getting from those investments? Then we can refine the process so we get better results. Here are some key questions if you truly want to dig deep into the effectiveness of your root cause analysis effort. And I'm not going to read through all these in detail. You can pause the slide and snag them or whatever you'd like to do. But just having a discussion with others in your organization that do root cause analysis and using these questions as a discussion or dialogue vehicle, you can get into some very interesting debates. And you can refine your process if everyone has that intent when they go into the dialogue. Here's an example of a classic table where we have our root causes on the left, our countermeasures to address them next to them, right to the right of them, the pros and cons of each countermeasure, and then what we found out. Here's where we link root causes to corrective actions. I love this tool. The only difference I make with my current tool is I use color coding and or shapes to show strength of relationship or type of relationship or both, where there is a connection between the root cause and the corrective action. Now, I do favor TapRooT. And I favor it for a variety of reasons. More importantly than anything else, it's not an opinion-based tool like the other three tools are that we've looked at here. The other three tools have an infinite number of possible root causes for a given problem. You could come up with anything if you wanted to. With TapRooT, you're working from a defined list of possible root causes for human performance problems and a similar list, but smaller, for equipment challenges. And you use evidence from your problem analysis and investigation efforts to help select your root causes. So it leads you to a very different result. What I had to ask myself when I started teaching this way back when is, does the list of root causes on the back of the tree make sense? And I'll just share one thing with you. The process has been out since 1988 now. That's 35 years, something like that. And they've only added one root cause and reworded it a few in the 20 years I've been teaching TapRooT. Most of the additions from the initial 88 root causes to the 103 that now exist happened in the early developmental stages as customers gave feedback. They built out the chart. But then as time went on and we continued to get feedback, there wasn't as much of a need to change. They added questions to the dictionary. They added notes. But it's been very interesting to see how that list of potential causes of human error has settled over time. So that's about as much as I can share here. I can't teach TapRooT. That's not the goal of this anyway. But that's probably one of the main things that we look at is, what do you get for results and how do they lead to corrective actions? Because if you're okay with a scrap rate of 2%, 3%, 4%, or rework in the 10 to 15% range, you probably don't have to go to the level that TapRooT takes you. Many of my customers, however, 99.9% is not good enough. 99.95% is not good enough if you sterilize medical devices, or if you work with highly explosive materials, or if you work in areas where stakeholders could be significantly impacted if you did something wrong. And so when you get into that world, Six Sigma accuracy does start to matter. If you think about lockout, tagout, where we're isolating processes and removing energy from processes, and we're working with very flammable stuff under very high pressure, imagine the potential for problems if a person misses a point of isolation or isolates the wrong. place within the system. And so we expect very low error rates with folks like that. The airlines seem to be more forgiving, right? They can be late 20%, 25% of the time, and we will somewhat accept that. But if you work in a world where the customer demands ultra high effectiveness, operational excellence, process excellence, micro level error rates, you have to use multiple strategies to achieve that. You go beyond the capability of the human mind, really. You go beyond human cognitive ability to be accurate and catch everything once you get out there into the tails of the normal distribution. That's why you can't get to 100% and stay there, because humans are humans, and situations change. The environment changes, customers change, expectations change, requirements change, regulations change, all because we work with humans. So if you want to improve your RCA process, if you want to improve your corrective action process, I give you some action items at the end of this video. Please take a chance to give them a look. But most importantly, what you're doing is you're looking at, okay, I invest this amount of time and effort into my root cause analysis efforts. Here's the root causes I get. Here's the corrective actions that those root causes lead me to. Here's the resultant impact on process errors, process failures. Am I happy with the connection that I'm seeing? Am I getting a good mix of root causes that leads to a good mix of corrective actions that reduces my error rates to the levels that I'm after? Or do I need to make improvements? So please feel free to contact me. Message me on LinkedIn. Shoot me an email at kevin@greatsystems.com. Shoot me a text at the phone number shown on the screen. It's been a pleasure sharing these root cause analysis approaches with you. Any of them will work if you ask the right questions, but that's the challenge. How do you know the right questions to ask? Everyone have a great day and keep improving.